She was beautiful, perhaps too beautiful, the kind of beauty that caught more than just the eye. Held ambition in its shadow. She entered the Topkapı palace not as a queen, not as a noble, but as one among many, a concubine, gifted, stolen, purchased, or born into it her. What mattered was what came next. Obedience, mystery, and survival. In the heart of the Ottoman Empire, behind the veils and courtyards of the imperial harem, a silent hierarchy ruled. While outsiders imagined these women lived in indulgence, the truth was different. Politics lived in their silks, war waged behind their smiles, and power, it was not given it. To bear the sultan's child meant elevation. But not every concubine was encouraged to climb. Some were actively discouraged, their beauty admired, but their wombs silently regulated by politics older than themselves. And this is where the story turns dark, calculated, and deeply human. The Ottoman harem was not merely a space of sensual pleasure, it was an institution of dynastic strategy. A woman who bore the sultan a son could become a valid sultan, the mother of a future ruler. With that came immense influence, control of the imperial household, and often dominance over court politics. But too many sons meant too many threats. The empire feared what all monarchies feared: fragmentation. A single heir meant unity. Multiple heirs meant war. History had already shown what fraternal bloodshed could do. So the empire adjusted. The rule of one mother, one son became an unspoken norm, later institutionalized under Sultan Mehmed II and carefully practiced throughout later centuries. Once a concubine gave birth to a son, she was expected to cease intimate relations with the son. She became the mother of a prince, and her duty was to raise him into a governor and hopefully a sultan. No woman was to become too powerful. No famine line within the harem was to grow large enough to threaten the state itself. But what of those who didn't bear a child? Some concubines were intentionally kept away from the sultan's favor beyond companionship. Their purpose wasn't procreation, it was containment. If a woman's charm risked stirring favoritism too deeply, or if her background suggested dangerous political alliances, she might be indulged but subtly sidelined. At times, eunuchs in the head of the harem orchestrated such exclusions. Birth control, abs, and calculated abstinence were all part of the unspoken control mechanisms in place. This wasn't just about the empire's stability. It was about preserving the fragile balance of the harem's inner power. Too many mothers of too many princes would breed factions. Factions would breed whispers. Whispers could breed war, and war, even within marble walls, would eventually bleed into the empire's heart. There was also another truth one whispered only in the deepest corners of the palace. Some concubines, especially foreign ones, were believed to have ulterior motives. Venetian spies, Persian nobility, or the daughters of rival dynasties. Some women were beautiful threats cloaked in velvet. Allowing them to bear a royal child could risk infiltration. Their wombs, symbolic as they were, became sites of negotiation, control, and, at times, quiet sabotage. Not every concubine longed for motherhood, some feared it. For every prince born was a potential corpse in the future. The Ottoman law of fratricide, where brothers were killed to secure the throne, meant that a son was not just a legacy but a gamble. To bear a prince was to write a tragic possibility into one's own story. To remain childless, therefore, could be a kind of freedom, an invisible shield against both danger and power. And still, despite all of this, some women defied the quiet rules. They seduced not only the sultan but fate itself. They bore children. They carved empires with their sons' names. But others fate used, adorned, then left to live out their days in shadowed corridors, untouched by power and burdened by what never was. This was the paradox of the Ottoman harem, where to be chosen was both a blessing and a trap, and to be barren could sometimes be safer than to be remembered. The halls of the Topkapı were quiet at night, but never truly asleep. Beneath the murmured prayers and the flicker of oil lamps, plans were always in motion. For every sultan who slept, a dozen eyes stayed open, watching, recording, steering history from behind, gauze and stone. The concubines who were discouraged from conceiving didn't always know it at first. Sometimes it began with subtle signals being removed from the sultan's bed rotation, or given new duties far from his chambers. Other times it was physical, infusions of bitter herbal teas, prepared by palace midwives under eunuch orders, brewed from wild rue, pennyroyal, and other secret blends. These concoctions were laced with old medicinal knowledge, passed down by women whose lives had been bound to wombs and whispers. Officially, no one spoke of birth control, but unofficially, it was everywhere. The Ottoman harem ran on precision. It had to. The survival of a dynasty, the pulse of an empire. The chief eunuch, or Kisler-Kosk, wielded power second only to the sultan when it came to harem affairs. Castrated as young boys and stripped of bloodline ambition, eunuchs were the perfect instruments of palace control. They held secrets like vaults, and sometimes They held futures in their hands. It was the eunuchs who decided which concubines could approach the sultan and when. A seemingly innocent change in the walking route to the bathhouse could mean exile from his favor. A shift in which woman served his wine could signal a new favorite and an old one being slowly phased out. If a woman grew too popular, too influential, or even simply too fertile, she could be managed in silence. There are records coded, indirect, but they're suggesting that eunuchs worked closely with palace physicians to quietly administer contraceptives, not pills or powders as we know them today, but vaginal pessaries made of herbs and honey, or incense fumigations meant to cool the womb. These methods weren't always effective, but that wasn't the point. They were signals, deterrents, political tools, wrapped in scent and ritual. But not all interventions were subtle. Some concubines who bore sons too soon or sons who weren't favored were forcibly separated from them. Their rooms relocated, their servants replaced. A childless concubine could be forgotten. But a concubine with a son who posed a threat, she could be removed, disgraced, or in rare case, as the empire expanded, foreign consorts entered the harem not just as lovers but as leverage. A Polish beauty might carry the whispers of kings. A Circassian girl might represent tribal alliances. A French convert might be a mystery too dangerous to solve. Letting such women bear royal heirs was a risk one the court couldn't always afford to take. Thus, concubines like them were kept close, admired, pampered, even but never truly allowed to cross the line from lover to mother. And in some tragic cases, a pregnancy would be allowed only to be ended through methods that never made it into the official records. Midwives knew how to correct nature, and what they couldn't achieve with medicine, the palace of politics could ensure with absence, exile, or silence. Still, some women tried. They found ways to hide pregnancies, to seduce at the right moment during the right moon. Others bribed you, some even poisoned rivals to remain in favor long enough to conceive. Love played its part too. Not every woman acted from ambition. Some astonishingly, genuinely loved the sultan. And in a world where nothing belonged to them, not even their Bediza child was the only thing they could. But love, in the harem, was often the first step toward ruin. And so, behind the silken walls of the empire's most mysterious chamber, the game was not only about seduction or loyalty, it was about survival. The women who lived within the harem were not passive ornaments. They were players in a quiet war, where each decision carried the weight of dynasties. To be chosen was never just a gift, it was a test. And to conceive a child was to roll the dice on one's fate, to invite both fortune and fatal attention. The concubines who were discouraged from bearing children may have been spared the immediate dangers of ambition, but they also faded into the margins of history, their names forgotten, even as their lives shaped the rhythm of palace power. Some never knew how close they came to changing the course of an empire. Others knew to mush and said nothing. In the Ottoman Empire, control was masked as kindness, silence as protection, and the prevention of life was, at times, the preservation of peace. The empire endured not just through conquest and decrepit, through the calculated stillness of those who were never allowed to bear its heirs.